People think INFJs influence others through words, kindness, or empathy, but that's not the real power. The real advantage is quieter, deeper, and far more unsettling. It's the way an INFJ can sit in a room, say nothing, and still shift the entire emotional temperature. It's the way their calmness forces others to confront themselves. And it's the way their silence exposes the insecurity in people who rely on noise, control, or dominance just to feel relevant. The moment an INFJ walks in, the dynamic changes, and most people have no idea why. You're about to see the psychological truth behind that shift. Why certain personalities lose their balance around INFJs. Why manipulators become frustrated. Why dominant people suddenly feel threatened. And why the INFJ's quiet awareness is more disruptive than any confrontation. Once you understand this advantage, you'll notice it everywhere, in conversations, relationships, conflicts, and even in how people look at you when you simply exist without performing. Before we dive in, I want to ask you something. Has your silence ever made someone react more than your words? Tell me in the comments. Your answers shape the next videos. And if you're new here, subscribe now, because missing the rest of this series means missing the part where everything suddenly makes sense. Write quiet power below so I know you're listening. Their silence forces others to confront their own insecurities. It happens subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. The INFJ grows quiet. Not out of fear, not out of withdrawal, but out of a deeper clarity that requires no performance. And in that silence, something unexpected begins to unfold, not within the INFJ, but within the people around them. Their stillness becomes a mirror, reflecting emotions others have spent years burying under noise, ego, and distraction. Suddenly, those who depended on reactions to feel powerful begin to sense the absence of it, and that absence exposes the truth they've been avoiding. Without a single word, the INFJ's silence highlights who feels threatened by what it reveals, not judgment, not anger, but the reality of their own unresolved insecurities rising to the surface. This is the moment when the dynamic shifts. The person who once relied on dominance, manipulation, or emotional chaos begins to feel something unfamiliar, discomfort. Because when the INFJ stops reacting, the spotlight turns inward. The controlling personality, the loud critic, the attention seeker. All of them begin to notice their strategies no longer work. Their provocation falls flat. Their subtle digs receive no emotional payout. Their attempts to destabilize meet a calm that cannot be moved. And in that quiet, all the tactics they used to control others suddenly feel transparent. The INFJ is not fighting back, yet somehow the other person feels like they're losing ground with every second of silence. What shakes them most is not resistance, it's observation. The INFJ's eyes stay steady, their energy immovable, their presence grounded. They aren't retreating, they're watching. And people who depend on noise to hide their weaknesses cannot handle being seen so clearly. The silence becomes a pressure they cannot escape, a truth teller that forces them to acknowledge the parts of themselves they've been running from. They start talking faster, filling the gaps, over-explaining, defending things the INFJ never questioned. Because without external conflict, they're left facing internal conflict, the kind they cannot win through force. And this is the quiet INFJ advantage. They don't silence people, they let people silence themselves. Their calm becomes a psychological terrain where only authenticity can breathe. Anyone built on insecurity feels exposed, unsettled, and strangely powerless. The INFJ never raises their voice. They never escalate. They simply withdraw all the emotional fuel the other person depended on, and in doing so, they reveal a truth that's been there all along. The loudest people are often the most afraid of what silence reveals. INFJs stay emotionally grounded, which destabilizes people who rely on dominance. Emotional grounding is the INFJ's silent superpower, the one thing that domineering personalities can't predict, influence, or control. When tension rises and others resort to aggression, pressure, or emotional intensity to assert dominance, the INFJ does something unexpected. They stay still. They remain composed. Their energy does not spike or crumble. And in that moment, the power dynamic collapses, not because the INFJ fought harder, but because they refused to enter the battlefield at all. Dominant personalities thrive on emotional reaction. It is the oxygen of their control. When the INFJ gives them nothing, no fear, no outrage, no submission, the person trying to dominate suddenly feels their influence slipping through their fingers. This grounded presence becomes disorienting to anyone who depends on force to feel strong. When they raise their voice, the INFJ doesn't match it. When they try to intimidate, the INFJ doesn't shrink. When they try to corner them emotionally, the INFJ simply observes with quiet clarity. This lack of reaction is not passivity, it is precision. The INFJ knows exactly what is happening, and instead of being pulled into chaos, they anchor themselves deeper. The grounded calm becomes a kind of psychological pressure that dominant personalities cannot withstand. Their tactic requires emotional chaos, but the INFJ's presence creates an emotional vacuum. Nothing they do gets the response they're trying to extract. And that frustrates them far more than confrontation ever could. The more the INFJ stays centered, the more unsteady the other person becomes. The manipulator begins repeating themselves. The aggressor becomes louder. The critic becomes harsher. All because their usual strategies are failing. They're not in control anymore, and they feel it. INFJs don't tell people this. They make them feel it through their emotional stability. Watching someone maintain complete composure in the face of attempted dominance forces the other person to confront their own lack of inner regulation, their own insecurity, their own fear. And suddenly, the person who tried to overpower the INFJ is the one who feels exposed. What truly destabilizes them is the realization that power no longer comes from pressure. It comes from presence. And the INFJ's presence is unwavering. They don't need to shout, threaten, or compete. Their grounded energy becomes the loudest force in the room. They observe everything, making others feel exposed without being called out. INFJs don't need to interrogate, confront, or accuse. Their eyes do most of the work. When they enter a room, they instinctively scan the emotional landscape. Tone shifts, microexpressions, the way someone's smile doesn't reach their eyes, the tension in a voice, the hidden agenda tucked between words. They absorb all of it quietly. And this subtle, constant observation creates an atmosphere where people feel strangely transparent around them. It's not that the INFJ announces what they notice. It's the opposite. Their silence signals understanding. Their calm presence tells people, without a single word spoken, I see more than you think. And that silent awareness becomes a mirror people can't escape. This is where discomfort begins for those who carry hidden motives or fractured intentions. The INFJ doesn't point fingers or expose flaws. They simply understand. And understanding is far more threatening than confrontation. Confrontation you can prepare for. But being silently read by someone who isn't even trying feels like being illuminated from within. Suddenly, the person who usually manipulates others hesitates. The loud one grows quieter. The deceptive one avoids eye contact. They sense that the INFJ sees the cracks in their performance, the gaps between what they say and what they mean. And because INFJs don't react immediately, People can't predict what the INFJ knows or how much they've picked up on. That uncertainty is what unnerves them. The INFJ's observation isn't passive. It is a form of psychological presence. They track patterns long before anyone realizes a pattern exists. They remember the details people hope others forget. They connect subtle emotional cues that reveal the story underneath. And because they stay outwardly calm, others can feel their own intentions being silently evaluated. There's no accusation, no confrontation, just awareness. That alone is enough to make people rethink their behavior. For the INFJ, observing isn't about judgment, it's about understanding the truth beneath the surface. But for those who rely on facade, manipulation, or emotional sleight of hand, that truth feels dangerous. They sense that the INFJ sees them clearly, and clarity is kryptonite to people who survive on distortion. Without saying a word, the INFJ exposes them. Without lifting a finger, they shift the power dynamic. And without calling anyone out, they make others reveal exactly who they are. Their calmness disrupts manipulation because they don't react on command. Manipulators survive on predictable reactions: the raised voice, the defensive explanation, the emotional scramble to fix the situation. But INFJs refuse to play that script. When someone tries to provoke them, their response isn't anger or panic. It's stillness. A quiet, grounded presence that doesn't match the manipulator's expectations. And in that moment, the manipulator loses their footing. Their tactics fall flat. Their emotional hooks miss their target entirely. Because the INFJ does not move unless they choose to. They do not respond unless the moment is genuine. They do not dance to someone else's emotional rhythm. Their calmness is not passive. It's strategic, intentional, and deeply unsettling to anyone used to controlling the tone of a conversation. This unshakable calm creates a psychological vacuum that forces manipulators to face themselves. When their attempts to trigger guilt, fear, urgency, or confusion fail, their confidence cracks. They start to reveal their true motives, pushing harder, exposing the desperation behind their control. Meanwhile, the INFJ watches, steady and silent, gathering information with every shift in tone and every misplaced accusation. The manipulator expects chaos, but receives quiet. They expect emotional reaction, but meet neutrality. They expect submission, but find sovereignty. And nothing destabilizes a controlling person more than losing the leverage they rely on. The INFJ's calmness is a shield built from emotional maturity. They understand their internal world so well that external pressure cannot easily distort it. They know when someone is trying to provoke them, and instead of resisting with force, they simply don't engage. Their refusal to react becomes its own form of power, one that exposes the manipulator's lack of it. In that stillness, the truth becomes painfully visible. The manipulator needs emotional chaos to function, but the INFJ functions best in silence. The imbalance is immediate and undeniable. The moment the INFJ stays calm, the manipulator's influence dissolves. The game ends. The power shifts. And the INFJ walks away with their clarity intact, while the manipulator is left confronting a truth they never anticipated. They cannot control someone who refuses to react. INFJs create psychological pressure simply by paying attention. Most people go through life half listening, half seeing, half feeling. They register noise but miss meaning. They hear words but lose intention. That's why when an INFJ pays attention, truly pays attention, it creates a pressure others aren't used to. Their focus is precise, steady, and deeply present. They watch the way someone speaks, the shifts in expression, the emotional undertones hiding beneath casual sentences. And because INFJs listen with their entire being, people suddenly feel exposed in ways they can't explain. It's not interrogation. It's not confrontation. It's the quiet intensity of someone who actually sees you, not the role you play. And for many, that alone is enough to unsettle everything. Their attention functions like a spotlight, not harsh but inescapable. People who are used to being unnoticed feel seen. Those who are used to controlling conversations feel examined. Those who hide behind charm or ego feel unmasked. Because INFJs don't interrupt, they don't try to dominate the moment. They let silence stretch. They allow truth to fill the gaps. And that silence becomes a psychological terrain where pretenders begin to sweat. They start explaining themselves more than necessary. They defend things no one questioned. They stumble over stories that no longer sound convincing under the INFJ's gaze. All because being fully witnessed by someone who sees patterns and emotional truth feels strangely like being held accountable. The INFJ's attention isn't aggressive, it's pure presence. But presence itself is powerful. It interrupts someone's ability to manipulate through distraction. It breaks the rhythm of dominance. It exposes inconsistencies. When the INFJ listens, they're not just gathering data, they're absorbing essence. And people can feel it, especially the ones who don't want to be understood too clearly. They sense the INFJ connecting dots, reading emotions, storing details. They sense that the INFJ is building a quiet internal map of what's really going on, one that can't be distorted by lies or theatrics. And that awareness alone creates pressure. The truth is, INFJs don't need to confront people to make them uncomfortable. They don't need to challenge, accuse, or argue. They simply have to notice. Their attention is enough. It reaches beneath the surface, pulling authenticity out of hiding and pushing illusions into the light. And for those who rely on illusion, the INFJ's quiet, observant presence becomes the very thing they fear most. A mirror they can no longer escape. They hold their boundaries quietly, which removes control from others. INFJs do not need to declare their boundaries loudly or dramatically. They do not argue, defend, or justify them. Instead, they simply hold them, calmly, consistently, and without apology. And this quiet firmness unnerves people who depend on pushing others to get their way. When an INFJ sets a boundary, it isn't a wall built out of anger, it's a threshold built out of self-respect. They don't shout, "You can't treat me like this." They simply stop allowing the behavior. They don't demand that someone change. They adjust their own access, their time, their energy. And in doing so, they remove the very leverage others once used to feel in control. This subtle withdrawal confuses people who expect resistance. Most manipulative or dominant personalities rely on pushback, because pushback is still engagement. But the NFJ doesn't fade. They disengage. They become quietly unavailable where they were once accommodating. They offer less emotional bandwidth, fewer explanations, fewer chances. Their tone softens, but their distance grows. That shift, gentle but immovable, is what disarms controlling people more than any confrontation ever could. Because you can argue with someone who fights you, but you cannot argue with someone who has already stepped back. Their boundaries operate like an invisible force. The INFJ doesn't need to announce, "This is where you stop." Instead, the other person simply feels the barrier. They sense that the emotional access they once had is gone. The influence they once held dissolves. The INFJ's attention, their empathy, their willingness to understand, all of it becomes reserved, filtered, protected. And people who relied on those qualities to manipulate or dominate feel suddenly powerless. Not because the INFJ punished them, but because the INFJ reclaimed themselves. What makes this boundary setting even more disruptive is its clarity. INFJs know exactly why they're pulling away, even if they never say it aloud. Their intuition shows them the pattern, the motive, the danger. And once they see it, they don't need to explain their withdrawal. They simply remove their emotional investment. The other person, meanwhile, feels the shift acutely. They start questioning what changed. They try to re-engage, to pull the INFJ back into old dynamics. But the INFJ no longer responds with the same openness, and that shift becomes irreversible. In the end, the INFJ's boundaries function like a quiet revolution. No noise, no drama, just a fundamental rebalancing of power. The one who tried to control loses control, and the INFJ, calm and steady, walks away with their peace and their sovereignty intact. Their presence shifts power because they cannot be influenced emotionally. INFJs possess an inner equilibrium that is difficult to disturb, and this makes them immune to the emotional tactics others use to gain control. While many people can be provoked, flattered, guilt-tripped, or pressured into responding a certain way, INFJs remain grounded in their internal compass. They feel deeply, but they do not get swept away easily. Their emotional awareness is so sharp, so attuned, that manipulation attempts become obvious long before they take effect. And this immunity creates a subtle but powerful shift in any interaction. The person who expected to lead the emotional dynamic suddenly realizes they have no influence at all. That loss of influence becomes the turning point, the moment power instinctively moves toward the INFJ. Their presence becomes even more commanding because of how little they expose emotionally. INFJs rarely give people the reactions they expect. When someone tries to provoke anger, the INFJ stays calm. When someone tries to guilt them, the INFJ sees the tactic instantly. When someone tries to sway them with emotional theatrics, the INFJ quietly watches until the truth reveals itself. This creates a psychological imbalance. The person attempting to influence them keeps reaching for emotional levers that simply do not work. They can't pull the INFJ into chaos, can't push them into confession, can't pressure them into giving more than they should. And that inability triggers frustration, confusion, even fear. Because once emotion fails as a tool, their entire strategy collapses. What makes this dynamic so powerful is that INFJs do not assert dominance, they remove susceptibility. And someone who cannot be influenced becomes someone who holds control without trying. Their neutrality becomes authority. Their calm becomes weight. Their quiet introspection becomes a force that others unconsciously adjust themselves around. People start choosing their words more carefully. They monitor their tone. They feel the need to justify themselves, even when the INFJ has not asked for any explanation. This unconscious shift reveals the truth. Emotional influence flows toward the person who is least affected by the emotional storms around them. INFJs carry a presence that tells others, "You cannot move me." Not through fear, not through charm, not through pressure. And once that truth settles in the room, the dynamic changes instantly. The person who once tried to lead loses their footing, while the INFJ, with no effort at all, becomes the steady center of gravity. This is the quiet power that INFJs seldom acknowledge, a power built not on dominance, but on emotional sovereignty. Their presence alone is enough to shift the entire balance. When you look closely, you realize the INFJ never needed to fight for power. They simply reclaimed what was always theirs by refusing to be moved by anything that wasn't real. Their silence, their grounded energy, their calm observation. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of someone who understands themselves so deeply that no one else can bend their truth. And that is why people who rely on control, manipulation, or emotional influence lose their footing the moment an INFJ steps into the room. The power doesn't shift because the INF takes it. It shifts because everyone else finally sees who actually had it all along. If you're still here, I want to ask you something personal. Do you recognize this quiet strength in yourself? Or are you only now realizing how much power you've been giving away? Before you scroll, type
I reclaim my power in the comments so I know you watched until the end, and so you anchor this truth in your own mind.
And if you're new here, subscribe to Brainy Quiet Mind for more insights that reveal the parts of you the world keeps overlooking.